All right, we're gonna have a mic check, and then we're gonna go live right into it. Let's make sure this live is going on right now. We just witnessed Devin Haney taking on Vasily Lomachenko, and we're gonna try to go through the fight and break it down in this controversial matter in which they always scream robbery every single week for one reason or another, right? So we're going to try to decipher this and see exactly who is right and who's wrong in terms of what is a proper decision. Should you score the fights in a way where you're looking at it as an entirety rather than by round by round? You see, that's kind of one of the key issues that they have with boxing in the current moment, right? Or if not, just overall boxing in general. Now, why is that? Well, because in the past, a lot of people, when they don't like a decision, they look at it and say to themselves, well, you know what? I don't think that this fight was judged properly. And in a lot of instances, they are correct in that certain aspect. But then there are other aspects where a lot of people just don't understand that fights are scored round by round, not in the Japanese MMA system to which you're practicing a fight and scoring it overall. Now, if you're doing it like that, then we're talking about just in terms of damage. Now, also earlier in the night or in the morning, if you're watching this in the West Coast time frame, you had the likes of Katie Taylor try to move up a couple of weight classes against Chantel Cameron, in which she miserably failed. And rightfully so, because you know what? The way that they judged in Ireland, obviously, you're going to be a little bit skeptical because Chantel Cameron is an away fighter, and obviously Katie Taylor is the bigger star in that aspect. So you would be a little bit hesitant to think that the Irish judges were going to give Chantel a fair share. Where lo and behold, they did exactly just that. They gave her a fair share, and not only did they give her a fair share, they also gave the entire fight to her in terms of a decision. So going tonight with Devin Haney versus Lomachenko, look, I don't think there's any surprises here that obviously Lomachenko was able to commit to a certain amount of damage. He was able to land a few shots. He was able to look like the old Lomachenko that we knew him to be. It was almost like he unlocked in his character of Avatar in whatever way that you want to look at Lomachenko. It's almost as if the guy was unlocking the Roy Jones Y'all Must Have Forgot track as some sort of like reward system that you would see in a video game. Now, why do I say that? Because he made you guys remember exactly why he was called the Matrix and why he is such a complicated style to deal with. Now, the fact that he wasn't able to win tonight doesn't really say much, but at the same time, you can't argue with the fact that Devin Haney did win the fight based on round by round. Now, in full disclosure, did I score the fight round by round? There are times where there are fights that I score round by round to really get an understanding of, okay, who's really winning this based on my own subjective opinion. Because by the end of the day, that's really all it is just nothing more than a subjective opinion, right? Because you have your a view of how you see the fight, and then imagine this, put this in perspective. You're at home watching this within a full camera view of the different shots that are going on in the fight, right? All the different situations that are going on and all the different camera angles that you have in the safety of your home. Whereas if, let's say, you're a judge, you're watching ringside, maybe you're not getting all the full view or angles of what's going on in the fight. So what happens is that you end up being in a situation where sometimes you're seeing a different fight than what everybody else in the world sees. So that's also a reality. And again, it's always common for a lot of people to always say robbery this and robbery that. The truth is that you can only have three judges and you can only have two fighters, one referee, and by the end of it all, there's going to be a lot of subjective opinions within those matters that are not always going to be in the favor of the eyes of the beholder, i.e., the audience. that's watching the fights. So with that in mind, let's see. Let's Okay, just wanted to make sure that the mic was on. What the mic was on right there. So okay. So once again, earlier of the night, you had Cameron defeating none other than Katie Taylor, which, by the way, is Katie Taylor's first professional loss. And Conor McGregor was in the crowd, not so much of the entire fight, the way that Eddie Hearn watches the entire card from top to bottom, but obviously Conor was there to support his fellow country woman other than Katie Taylor. So while Conor was there, I think that he reminded himself that, you know what, in this game, nobody cares that you're a superstar because no doubt about it, Katie Taylor is a big superstar in women's professional boxing, especially out in Ireland. I think she's right up there with Conor McGregor. Now, obviously, Conor McGregor is Conor McGregor, and there's nobody that's ever going to be like him in the history of professional MMA. However, you can have people that are just a little bit right underneath that in terms of notoriety. Well, none other than Katie Taylor is somebody that can fill that role. And in a way, she kind of understands what Conor is going through as this famous person, having all this weight on her shoulders. Well, now I think what I was trying to get at with that rant was that Conor tonight learned that anybody at any particular time can lose to anyone out there. And it doesn't matter if you're the biggest superstar in the world or if you are a, one of these people that's very well known or this and that. The bottom line is when you step in that cage or when you step in that ring, you can't bring your name in there with you. You can't bring your accolades, what you've done in the past. So, in other words, when Conor McGregor walks in there in the cage against Michael Chandler, he can't bring the Conor McGregor that was the double champion who defeated Eddie Alvarez. And also the Conor McGregor that has walked in there and fought meticulously in a methodical fashion against Nate Diaz in the second fight that they had. He can't bring that Conor McGregor in there. The only Conor McGregor that he can bring in there is the guy that has rehabilitated his injured leg and now is going into one of the toughest fights that he can come back to in the UFC's 155 division, which is none other than Michael Chandler. And tonight, Conor McGregor got to be reminded of that in the same similar fashion that Devin Haney was reminded that, you know what, even though I was the younger guy, even though I was the undisputed champion on paper, I could not take that in there with me because by the time that I walk in that cage, I still have to go in there, or I'm sorry, the ring in this particular aspect, I still have to go in there and deal with this man's footwork. I have to go in there and deal with this man's elusive fighting style. I have to work with his angles. I have to work against his jab. You look at the picture right here. Look at this straight jab that he hit Devin Haney with. Now, make no mistake, Devin Haney came out tonight on top using a lot of good counters, using a lot of good backstep fighting, in which I think is very important if you want to be a defensive and counter fighter, right? But in the eyes of a lot of people's view, or rather in the eyes of the beholder, they're going to look at the type of damage that, let's say, LomaChenko was able to dish out in the last few rounds and somehow make that as the entirety of the whole fight, rather than the score-by-score basis that they had to do it each round by round. And again, that's one of the same arguments that you can have tonight with Katie Taylor and the Cameron fight. Now, also in another women's fight event tonight, you had obviously Angela Hill taking on Mackenzie Dern. And Mackenzie Dern did exactly what she knew how to do, which was what? Take her opponent down to the ground, control them, and dominate them. And then by the end of it, she was able to basically get her black belt from her jiu-jitsu coach, which is none other than her dad, who is a worldwide known jiu-jitsu specialist himself. So Edmund Shabazian was defeated by Anthony Hernandez in the third round via TKO stoppage. And then Lupita Gomez got a decision What else happened? Andre Filio got a brutal knockout against Joaquin Buckley. Michael Johnson got brutally knocked out by Diego Ferreira. And that was the main card of tonight's fight night in the UFC. By the way, also taking place in Vegas. Carolina got a decision over Vanessa Demolopoulos. And then Team Alpha Male's own Borchevich got TKO against Hazer Machete. And then Ilir Latifi got a decision loss against Rodrigo Nascimento Ferreira. And then Gilbert Urbina got a knockout as well. Chase Hooper gets a decision. I think this was his 155 debut. Natalia Silvia gets first round TKO. And then Thema Gorimbo, gets a decision over Takashi Sato. And that's the UFC's fight night for May 20th, 2023. Sharing the same night with Devin Haney and Katie Taylor. Those were the main fights that was going on tonight. Now, what about the upcoming fights that a lot of these Russian Muslim fighters have? Because don't worry, I'm going to go back to Devin Haney and then go back to the Katie Taylor fight and what that means and Conor McGregor's inspiration. And we're going to go back and forth and give you this dopamine high because let me tell you, the way that I like doing a podcast is the way that I want to listen to certain subjects or particular matters at the same time. Meaning that, let's say if you're listening to Joe Rogan, who has a lot of topics and a lot of discussions and a lot of different people and expertise that he has in his particular content, right? They mix it up. They go from talking about MMA and then next thing you know, they're talking about science. And then from the science in between that, they're talking about bro science. And then somewhere in between that, it gets mixed into talking about fighters, a biography or certain fighters or certain fights or certain fighting events that are coming up. And that's kind of what I'm going to do in this situation. So there's been a lot of recent talks with a lot of these Russian Muslim fighters that are getting a hard time getting fights, right? You have Omar Nurmagomedov. He has a very hard time getting a fight at 135. Nobody wants to fight him. So what is his next upcoming matchup that Umar Nurmagomedov has going on? His next fight that he has going on is he was supposed to be offered Merab, who, by the way, is a training partner of none other than what's his name? Aljo, the 135 champion. Now, the problem with that, obviously, those guys don't want to fight each other because of the fact that they're brothers and this and that, and you can't blame them because that's the same thing that you would be asking out of Islam and out of Khabib. That's never going to happen. You're never going to get these guys to ever fight each other, right? So that's a reality that you have to understand. Also, how about Islam Makhachev? When he was coming up, he had a hard time fighting anybody. He had a hard time fighting Poirier or Justin Gaethje. Well, now he may have that opportunity because obviously Justin Gaethje and Dustin Poirier now have a chance to fight each other for the BMF 155 championship and possibly elevate themselves into a number one contendership. But when Islam was on the rise, he was not able to do that, so they just shot him straight away into the number one contendership against Charles. And lo and behold, he becomes a champion and keeps it within the linealship of Khabib's Team Eagle MMA. Right? Khabib is the champion. He leaves, and then next thing you know, Islam comes and scoops it up later on against the guy who won it through a vacancy, which was none other than Charles Oliveira. Now, another guy that has problems with his fights going on is none other than Khamzat. And the reason why a lot of people are saying that Khamzat has problems is because they're citing it through the fact that he's a bit of a coward, right? Or he's not taking these fights or this and that. Well, what does he do? He goes and basically fires back, pushes back at the critics and says to them, hey, listen, I've been trying to call everybody out. Nobody wants to fight me. I've called this guy out. I try to make a fight with this guy, and lo and behold, nothing happens. Well, here's something that I don't think anybody is really talking about, that anybody is really discussing, which is the fact that he may have visa issues. Now, why would he have visa issues, you may ask? Well, let's take a look at the picture right now. Who do I have here? You have Ramzan Kadyrov with none other than Mike Tyson when Mike Tyson came to visit Chechnya. And then you have here Better Biev, you have Khabib, then you have Khamzat, and then you have Verdum on the bottom picture of Devin Haney getting jabbed if you look right into the center. So he is the possibility of the culprit of the reason why maybe Khamzat has visa issues going on. Now, they're looking at trying to get Khamzat to fight in October. Why so far? Why not in the summertime when you got all this heat going on with the fact that there's not a heavy 289 card in Canada, with only Amanda Nunes headlining that card, and then you have UFC 290, maybe not as hot as 291 or 292, and this and that, right? Maybe you could have added Khamzat in there. Well, the problem is a lot of those fights are taking place in none other than the United States. So because of that, you're going to have problems. You're going to have problems in terms of trying to get him here, and perhaps maybe it's the reason of having a dictator like Ramzan Kadyrov, who, by the way, is one of Putin's guys in terms of his right-hand man, in terms of the guy that does his bidding. Now, here's a little history on Ramzan Kadyrov, just so you guys can understand in perspective what exactly I'm talking about, right? So here's the Wikipedia of Ramzan Kadyrov. Obviously, Russian politician, serves as the head of the Chechnyan Republic. He was formerly affiliated with the Chechen independence movement through his father, who was a separatist and appointed by the Mufti of Chechnya. He was a colonial general in the Russian military. Kadyrov is the son of Chechen President Ahmad Kadyrov, which you often notice and hear a lot of Chechen fighters and soldiers in the battlefield call out Ahmad Silah, Allahu Akbar, which is their call sign to their affiliation and their loyalty to Ramzan Kadyrov and his family. So a couple of things that you might want to know about Ramzan Kadyrov. So that separatist independent, aspect of his militia career, I think has a certain aspect of jihadism in that, right? So the interesting thing about Ramzan Kadyrov is that he's basically what you would call a jihadist who became a head of state in the country that he now currently runs, which is Chechnya. So why I find this fascinating is because of the fact that you look at a lot of the fighters in the UFC, right? The ones that I'm talking about right now. I'm talking about Omar Nurmagomedov. You have Zabit in there. You have Khamzat. You have Abus Magomedov. You had Ankalaev. You have all these guys that are basically in one form or another affiliated with Ramzan Kadyrov. Okay, so the interesting thing about this is that one thing that I got to tell you about Chechnya is that it's a very fundamentalist Islamic country in terms of the Salafi school of thought, right? Which is a very conservative form of Islam. Now, why I find that interesting is because from what I hear from a lot of people that are Chechnyan or people that are parts of that world, or people that have a great knowledge and understanding of the different sects of Islam, they say that Ramzan Kadyrov is a Sufi, right? Which is interesting because how is it that a man who basically ascribes to the Sufi school of thought is somehow considered the head of a Chechnya Republic, which are Sunni Salafi majority type of guys? And that's what I find really fascinating about Ramzan Kadyrov in that sense, right? How is it that he's able to run a country like this with the type of school of thought that he has? But then if you look at his military career, he is obviously a very decorated, commander in the Russian military. He basically is the deputy prime minister of Chechnya since 2004, which was appointed by none other than the president himself, right? His sister was detained by the Dagestani police in 2005, 150 armed men. And I mean, like, you just look at this guy's career, it is just full of getting into different conflicts, getting into different wars, and then he becomes the acting prime minister. And then you fast forward all of that into the things that are going on with the Ukrainian war right now. And you got to think that, you know what, this is one of the most fascinating guys that I think is tied to combat sports. Now, why do I say that? Because, look, you got to understand, okay? He now has control of some of the top fighters in the world, which is basically all the Chechnyan guys that I had just mentioned and all the guys that you see in this photo right here, right? That including Khabib, Beterbiev, uh, Khamzat, all these guys. And he's now in control of these guys while in the middle of this conflict with Ukraine. And once again, this is a great segue into adding Lomachenko into this. By the way, how interesting is it that there's a lot of reports that people are saying out there that Lomachenko somehow abandoned the Ukrainian post and he's not a very favorable person in the Ukrainian military at the moment. Now, I don't know how true that is or if that's just a rumor, but full disclosure, I just wanted to let you know that in the relationship that he has with this current conflict. Now, one of the things you got to understand about this conflict is the morale between the two groups, right? Who has more of the morale in this aspect versus the other? Now, here's the thing that you got to understand. There's a lot of Ukrainians that are leaving the country, right? And you can argue that the majority of them are women and men as opposed to, let's say, I'm sorry, women and children as opposed to the men themselves that have to be left in the country to fight and to be conscripts and to somehow enlist in one form or another in the defense of Ukraine. Whereas you have in Russia, I think you can argue and say that there's also an aspect of low morality within their military ranks, being that, let's say, they have generals and officers that are a little bit scattered in the way that they may handle war or the way that they may have a cultural preference to not receiving a lot of criticisms, which can affect your methods and can affect your strategy going into the battlefield. Whereas with the Ukrainians, you could argue that even though they have an element of scatteredness in their military as well, you can also argue that they have a little bit more of an organization because obviously they have the help of the United States, they have the help of the United Kingdom, they have the help of all these NATO countries that have an invested interest in that region and to somehow stop Russia. So there's a little bit more of an organization in that. But at the same time, if you really are one of those people that, let's say, hey, you know, why is he talking about all these things that are going on in these parts of the world or this and that? Isn't this an MMA show or this and that? Well, okay, I'm going to tell you how this relates to any of this, right? Because yes, you can say that the Ukrainians are a lot more organized based on the international help that they have in the battlefield. But it seems that in the one-on-one competition of fighting, one can argue that, hey, you know what? A lot of these Chechnyan Russian guys, in particular, the Chechnyan Russian Muslims, are the ones that are dominating the UFC. Now, can you say that about other Russians? Not so much, because it's not the era of Fedor Emelianenko or Oleg Takov, one of the original fighters in the early UFC days when it was bare knuckle, one of the first Russian champions to win the tournament in that particular era of the UFC, right? It's not so much of the, well, how do I say this, the Christian Orthodox Russians that are dominating the sport now. It's mostly Chechnyan, Sunni, Salafi-minded fighters from the Caucasus regions that are dominating. And you know what? One of the problems that they have going on is that a lot of people have a hard time trying to sign fights with them because nobody wants to fight them. Well, for one reason or another. Here's one reason. For one, a lot of Dagestanis, if they're not in Khabib's camp or they're not in any kind of affiliation with a famous fighter or a famous gym, it's very hard to go out there and risk the rank that you worked so hard for and the position that you have in the company of the UFC to somehow get knocked down a notch by an unknown name Dagestani that's just going to wrestle you to the end of the final bell. And here's the thing, it's not the biggest like risk reward factor that a lot of these fighters can take. So this is the reason why a lot of these fighters have a hard time taking fights. But then the problem with that is you have criticism from people that are not in the business, or people that are not in the field of management, or people that are not in the field of sports negotiations, and they don't understand that a lot of these guys have a hard time getting fights. Makayev is one of those people in that aspect. However, one thing about Makayev that's interesting is that he's managed by the same manager of Conor McGregor, which is none other than El-Kheer. And why I find that fascinating is because El-Kheer is the type of guy that can really do a lot of things for not only McGregor, but also the other clients that he has, that networks from the NHL to the NFL to the NBA to all these different avenues that he has with college sports. Because obviously, before Audie was a big time lawyer in LA, he was a UCLA linebacker during his college football days. A little interesting fact to know about that guy, which is the reason why he has so much influence in the world of sports. And how about the fact that El-Kheer was recently the guy that was narrating the majority of Conor McGregor's recent documentary that's now released out on Netflix. So once again, this is the type of guy that Muhammad Makayev has behind him. Now, even with that, even with the marketing machine behind Muhammad Makayev, even with the fact that he has the Bahraini government and the Bahraini royal family sponsor his fights, sponsor his training, and give him, a place to train, a place to check his BMI levels, a place that checks his heart rate, all these high-tech Ivan Drago stuff that he has going on in Bahrain. And then he has the help of the prince, who is the head of the special forces of that country. So the guy is just fully loaded. But even with that, it's very difficult for Muhammad Makayev to go out there and get fights. Now, he has this beef with this local English fighter who now made it to the UFC, Jake Hadley, right? Which I think is really fascinating. The beef that Muhammad Makayev and Jake Hadley has going on. Why is that? Well, because they've been trying to fight each other since the regional days. And then you have Muhammad Makayev, who is the quintessential aspect of what a lot of people now cite in MMA as Dagestani privilege. Even though the guy was a refugee, even though he came to England with no money in his pocket other than just knowing that he could wrestle and that he can go to an MMA gym and somehow make this into a fully functioning career for himself. Okay, and even though that he was able to earn these sponsorships that I had just mentioned and all these management teams that are behind him, nonetheless, he is the quintessential opposite of somebody like Jake Hadley. Now, Jake Hadley had to fight his way through the regional scene, had to start his pro career a little bit earlier, whereas Muhammad Makayev was in this position to where he was able to train and compete in Bahrain and have all these different entities back him up. But again, even with that, it's very hard to match up Muhammad Makayev. Now, let's go to Khamzat. Why is he hard to match up? Well, for the same reason. He's hard to match up because, once again, I'm telling you guys right now, he has a visa issue going on, which I think affects his travel to the United States. Now, I don't think that he's banned from coming to the United States completely, but I think that for him to come into a summer card that they have in, let's say, Canada, UFC 289, and then UFC 290 in Vegas, and in UFC 291 in where they have UFC 291, I believe Utah, right? For him to come to the United States and do some of these summer cards, he has to have his visa, and it's not that he can't get in here, but he may not be able to get in here maybe after the summer because of the processing that has to take place with visas and immigrations and custom border agents and things of that nature. Whereas they could just easily throw him into an Abu Dhabi card in October and just call it a day, right? But even before that, they had to really fast track Khamzat to the top in terms of fighting somebody like Gilbert Burns because nobody wanted to fight him. And this is the same problem that a lot of these guys have going on. Now, is the quote-unquote aspect of Dagestani privilege real? I hear MMA Guru and MMA Joey, all these other MMA content creators on YouTube talk about it. There's a reality to it, but then there's an exaggeration to the narrative that they're trying to spew. And what do I mean by that? Well, the truth is that if you're a Dagestani fighter or if you're a Muslim fighter, never mind just Dagestani, if you're somebody like Ottoman Azaitar or Bilal Muhammad or Taha, all these guys that are fighting in the UFC, right? Just being Muslim alone, it does lend you a certain privilege the same way that you would if you were a British fighter. Why? Because there's just a certain fan base that are just going to get behind their guys. And we seen it tonight in the Irish boxing card with Katie Taylor and Chantel Cameron. You've seen how they came out and supported their people. I mean, a lot of the Irish guys in that card tonight, they all got banged up, right? I mean, Cully got banged up by that Jose Jr. guy, which was a shock in and of itself. And then you had Katie Taylor losing, and then you obviously had that McFarlane guy, one of these heavyweights in the earlier cards, lose in the Celtic heavyweight championship, which I think is the same championship that Tyson Fury had held during his regional days. But nonetheless, that's what I'm trying to say, is that there's just certain fans that are just going to ride for their team or ride for their people. And it just so happens that if you're a Muslim fighter, you're just going to get that privilege. So yeah, do they want to see these guys get to the top really fast? Yes. That's one aspect of it. The other complicated aspect of this is the fact that you just can't get these guys fights. Nobody at 135 wants to fight Omar Nurmagomedov. Nobody at 145 really wanted to fight Zabit when he was active. And then Khabib, on his way up, they basically used him as a negotiation ploy or some kind of negotiation bait to try to get McGregor to fight for a double championship in New York against Eddie Alvarez, where it was supposed to be Khabib for a long time getting a shot against Eddie Alvarez, going back to the days of when Anthony Pettis was champion. So this is just the problem they have. The reality is that these guys come from one of the toughest regions in the world. And not only did they come from one of the toughest regions in the world, they also train very tough with no mercy and no negotiations to social justice or negotiations towards taking it easy or having an easy day or this and that. I mean, these guys, you want to talk about a David Goggins style of training. I mean, these guys in Dagestan and in Chechnya, they are David Goggins to the max. And you can't deny that. You see that in the way that they fight. Now, why do I say that? And why you can't deny that in the way that they fight? A lot of these guys, they know how to grind, which means they know how to wrestle. And when they know how to grind, they know how to control a fight. And not only they know how to control a fight, they train to constantly win positions. If you guys have ever been to San Jose, where Khabib trains at, with Islam, with Umar, with the other Nurmagomedov that got into that street fight with Khamzat, all these guys, the one thing that they know how to do better than anybody is constantly win positions, which is why even if you notice in Khabib's earlier fights, even in his striking, yes, did it look a little bit unpolished in the way that he used his strikes or the way that he was swinging wildly? Yes, but a lot of it had a method to its madness, to where it was just basically a way to either try to close range or to assess a type of shooting range that Khabib had to, let's say, shoot from, a single leg to a double leg, or try to transition from changing levels, and when to do that, when to fake, and this and that. These guys just know how to win. They know how to win, and the style of Sambo, in my opinion, I think has a lot of influence in that, which I think is very fascinating, because if you think about it, obviously Sambo was created by mainland Russia. All the mainland Russian guys from the Soviet Union days were the ones that perfected this style, right? So that obviously Russia went through its communist, socialist phases, and then it became somewhat of a democracy slash capitalist slash conservative republic of some sort. And with that, they passed down that fighting art, the fighting arts of Sambo, from the Russian Orthodox Christians all the way down to the Russian Muslims that perfected that style and made it viable for mixed martial arts. Obviously not in the way that Fedor or, let's say, Oleg was one of the first guys to pioneer Russian martial arts to a high-level, no-holds-barred fighting competition. But nonetheless, it was the Russians that had picked it up. Oh, and by the way, here's an interesting documentary I saw on Vice. right? I saw this documentary on Vice where they had these white nationalist Russians, and I know that they accuse Ukraine of having Nazis in their ranks. I can't deny that. Those are facts. Those are the reality of the news and what you're going to see out there in the headlines and the common knowledge that is now available to the world. But also, Russia in and of itself has a growing problem with right wing nationalists, Nazis as well. And a lot of them created their own league only because, and I saw this on a Vice documentary. I thought it was interesting. These white nationalists created their own fight league because they were not able to keep up with the Russian caucus fighters of their country, which is all of Russia and Ukraine, right? So they had to create their own league to feature their own guys because they couldn't hang with the Muslim guys. So what does that tell you? That tells you that when you're talking about Russian fighting systems, you are literally talking about Russian Muslims that are dominating that scene. And it is evident in mixed martial arts. It's evident even in kickboxing. It's evident in boxing that you see with Arthur Beterbiev and all these other guys from the eastern mountainous parts of Asia slash Russia, right? It's pretty evident. Why? Because they have the environment of being able to get used to, let's say, high elevation. So they have good oxygen, which means they have good cardio. They can push a pace, and they only train hard and only hard. So when they push a pace on you, it's a hard pace to deal with, which equals to what? The fact that these guys just have a hard time getting fights and getting people to agree to fight with them because of the danger that they can pose to a lot of these fighters. And here's the thing you got to understand about some of these fighters, right? The thing is, a lot of these guys, okay, that are not within the circles of Khabib, that are not within the circles of Khamzat, a lot of them, and I'm not saying this to discourage anyone in any way, right? This is just, I'm speaking facts. When these guys win a fight, what do when they celebrate? They go out and get drunk. They go out and maybe sometimes take drugs of any kind, whether that would be recreational or non-recreational or everything in between. That's the reality of many fighters in terms of the non-Muslim guys. Now, the Muslim guys, what happens? They go and win a fight. What do? They go home to the hotel room and they don't want to miss Isha prayer after they're done with their fight. And by the way, a good reminder, it's one of the prayers that I have to get to tonight because, obviously as Muslims, we have 5 prayers in a day. And we, if you're devoted enough, you follow that and you don't deviate from that. And that's what you're going to deal with these Muslim fighters. They're not out there in strip clubs, or they're not out there doing dangerous things for their body or their health or this and that. So guess what? By Monday time, if they're not damaged the way that, let's say, Loma or Devin Haney got damaged tonight, or Angela Hill in that matter, guess what? They're going to be back at it Monday, fresh as a daisy, going back in there training again. Because guess what? When Islam defeated Charles Oliveira, guess what Khabib told Islam to do? He said, brother, now that we champion, we must go for greatness. So we fight Volkanovski, okay? You come and you train again Monday. No bullshit. That's what we do. Okay, that's literally what Khabib did with Islam Makhachev. He went back right at it again. They didn't go out to a party. Okay, Khabib probably has a type of money where he can buy yachts. They're not out there hanging out in yachts, okay, with a bunch of fake people that just want to hang out for the sake of the Instagram photo op. Okay, they're out there training, praying, training, and praying. And then when the fight is done, it's like, okay, you have a moment to relax. What do these guys do on their off time? Who knows? But not any of the things that I had mentioned that other fighters do. Because, look, man, I've trained in enough gyms and I've trained with enough guys to know the mentality of the majority of fighters. And I've trained with Muslim fighters. I've trained with non-Muslim fighters. And the reality is there. Now, once again, if you're listening to this, you're probably thinking, well, who are you to judge what they do? not here to judge what they do at all. I'm just stating facts of what it is that one guy does and what the other guy doesn't do. And you got to ask yourself which lifestyle is more helpful. Now, that goes also into the question of society in and of itself. You look at all the things that's going on in the United States, in Western Europe, and in America right now, all the decadence, all the degeneracy, and all the indecency that is going on. So you got to think to yourself, which part of the world has it right? And again, I'm not talking about the political matters at hand, right? Because we all know you can't go out there and just support one side or the other or this and that, because then you're going to be looked at one way or the other side is going to look at you this way. And it's just a whole bunch of mess that you don't want to deal with. But if I could compare Russia and America, I could say this, right? And I'm doing this in terms of combat sports so that we can understand the different mentalities of each fighters. In America, obviously there's a lot of problems that goes on with, let's say, boys in the hood or guys in the ghetto that have no father figures. This is a prevalent reality in that space, right? So they don't have a good father figure. They don't have anybody to teach them how to go out into the outdoors, how to enjoy the outdoors, how to change tires, how to do things that are manly, how to fight, how to box, how to wrestle, the way that these Dagestani guys have. And by the way, interestingly enough, I told you guys I called this boxing YouTube channel that I guess I've been listening to for a long time, called The Boxing Voice, right? They let people call in or this and that. So I got into a call in one of their shows, and I remember citing to the effect of the fact that Devin Haney versus Tank Davis, I think, has a good, interesting cultural dynamic. And you're probably thinking, well, how can you possibly see a cultural dynamic between two African American fighters that are at the top of their game right now and basically come from the same culture? Well, you're right about that. Devin Haney and what's his name? Tank Davis, they both come from the same urban American culture. There's no doubt about that. But the difference between Devin Haney and Tank Davis is that Devin Haney is a Muslim. Devin Haney has a father figure. And again, this is not to slag off their skills in any type of way, because that's not what I'm doing here. What I'm simply doing right now is giving you an exercise of trying to understand the different mentalities that both of these guys come from and how it affects their outside behavior and their outside occurrences that they deal with on a daily basis, in terms of Tank getting in trouble with the law, in terms of Devin Haney not getting in trouble with the law, in terms of Tank Davis not having a father figure and having a single mother that he grew up with, as opposed to Devin Haney, who had his father with him. Yes, they both come from the same culture. For goodness sakes, Bill Haney, the father of Devin Haney, was the manager of Northern California rapper Too Short. Okay, so it doesn't get any more, I guess, similar in terms of cultural significance between Tank and and Devin Haney. Obviously, the only difference there is class, because let's face it, if your dad is a manager of rappers or works in sports management or things of that nature, obviously one kid is going to be a little bit more well off than the other, which is none other than Devin Haney. But I said in the Boxing Voice podcast that that's the dynamic between these two guys, is that you have one guy who grew up with a dad and the other guy that didn't. And I think that there's an interesting dynamic story that you can tell from that fight between Devin Haney and Tank Davis. So yeah, that's basically the long little rant and story that I have with my time calling the Boxing Voice and explaining my opinion on Devin Haney and Tank Davis. Now, again, this doesn't diminish anything outside of the fact that these two guys are great warriors and great fighters and skilled boxers at that, and we need to see them fight because they are the next thing that needs to happen. But nonetheless, what I'm trying to explain here is the outside distraction that, let's say, a Muslim fighter versus a non-Muslim fighter gets. And I think it's clear. It's very clear that There's just certain things that if you lead a certain lifestyle, and it doesn't have to be a Muslim or this and that, or but what I'm saying is that you look at guys that have a Christian background or guys that are believers of some faith of some sort. There's a certain aspect of higher purpose that they live for and a certain discipline that comes with that. And that's really all that there is to it, right? There's no magic trick or some type of magic potion that goes into what makes a great fighter great or what makes them who they are. All it is just a simple ingredients of wake up every day, do your runs, do your rounds, do your conditioning, and then come back and do it again and do that in that same repetitive motion. Now, that's the life of a fighter. For some people, that may seem redundant and objectively clear in terms of what you do, but you would be surprised how many fighters out there deviate within that. I mean, in between these camps, some of these guys go out there and drink, some of them smoke, some of them do certain type of hard drugs that makes them the way that they are or affects the way that they perform. And these are just things that are just not talked about. But it is within those small details that makes a fighter great, that makes a fighter exceptional. The fact that they can say no to drinks, well, Muslims don't drink at all. The fact that they can say no to drugs, well, you know what they do in those countries. If you do drugs, especially if you get caught selling them, it's an automatic death penalty. They don't have these distractions of wondering who their mother or who their father is. They have a clear understanding of who their family is. So there's a lot of good foundation in that. There's a lot of good foundation and support systems within these athletes that go into these combat sports careers, meaning that the family has a good understanding of being a support system rather than being a hindrance of some sort. So those are the difference that I think really exists within certain fighters that come from one place or another. And again, maybe that's controversial to say, maybe not, or maybe there's just a lot of truth to it. But you got to think, why is it that these Russian fighters from this part of the world is dominating this sport? And of course, you got to think there's multiple factors of that. But the one factor you can't deny above all else that you need in combat sports to succeed is discipline. And if you have that, you can conquer absolutely anything. And that is the reason why a lot of these guys are able to do what they do. That's the reason why Devin Haney was able to do what he did tonight. He had a clear focus from a young age of what he wanted to do. That's why he decided, you know what, I'm not going to go to the Olympics. I'm going to skip all that. I'm going to go right into the pros. And becoming a pro as a boxer in the United States, I think you have to be at least 18 or maybe 17 to get a waiver. I know Rory McDonald in MMA got his pro license at 16. Same with Jordan Meehan, who was one of his regional rivals coming up towards the UFC. Well, Devin Haney had to go down to Mexico to fight at 16 years old. And then he had to learn his craft from there. Obviously, he rose through the ranks of fighting journeymen and guys that have less than a 50 or 500 record of some sort. But nonetheless, he was out there perfecting his craft from a young age all the way to his adulthood, and this was the end result of it, becoming one of the youngest undisputed champions in boxing. So there is no magic potion. There is no magic trick. There is no coming from this particular place is going to make you harder than this guy or this and that. Because, hey, if that's the case, right, you ever wondered why is it that the top guys of fighting don't come from Los Angeles? I mean, are there a lot of gyms in Los Angeles? Yeah, but how many super champions or lineal champions or undisputed champions specifically come from big city names like LA or Miami or New York or this and that? You got to think to yourself, there's a reason why John Jones doesn't even live in these parts of the world. He doesn't live in New York. John Jones doesn't live in LA. John Jones doesn't live in Miami, because God knows what would happen if somebody like John Jones was to live in Miami. Okay, with all of that snow that's available down there, and I'm not talking about the type of snow that you see up in Detroit, baby. You know exactly what I'm talking about. So if he was to live in those type of environments, would it be good for him? Probably not. So all these superhero iconic figures that we have in our mind of what a champion should be, that they came from these glamorous places of Hollywood, the reality of combat sports is really just as simple as a Sunday morning stroll onto Ohio or Iowa or some random Midwest state. And why do I say that? Because guess what? Within America, some of the toughest fighters in the world come from that part of America, which is the Midwest, right? You ever heard of the term, oh, corn fed tough or country tough or this and that? Those are the bread and butter of American athletes that come from those parts of the world, not the glamorous side of Chicago or the glamorous side of LA or Compton or all these exotic places, or not exotic in the American centric sense, but exotic to the sense of how the world would see how a superhero is supposed to be. Where's Superman from? He's from New York City. Go figure. He's from New York City. It's more interesting than anything else. Where's where's Batman from? Gotham City. Okay, a variation or a creation of New York City or a combination of Gotham of some sort. Nonetheless, an interesting place. Okay, but you want to talk about one of the top pound for pound boxers in the world, Terrence Crawford. Where's he from? Nebraska. Sound interesting? No, not really. But I think that's why his pay-per-view numbers reflect that. How about John Jones? One of the baddest men in the world. Where's he from? New York, but lives in New Mexico and prefers to live down there. And then he dominates people across different weight classes now in the heavyweight division out of New Mexico. Okay? So, once again, that's one thing you have to understand about combat sports, is that the success in it and the understanding of it is really just as simple as a stroll in a Midwestern town. Okay? It's not as complicated or as glamorous as Hollywood, Beverly Hills, or Greenwich Village of New York. Okay? It's really just simple. You wake up in the morning, which is what you do anyway as a Muslim, Fajr prayer, and then you train, and then you rest, you take lunch, and then you train again, and then you pray in between that, and then you rest, and then maybe somewhere in between that you're doing some kind of recovery. And guess what? Praying in Islam has certain variations of that, where you prostrate and you pray, you bend your back, you get on your knees, you're sitting on your knees, and this and that. There's benefits to that. I urge you guys to look up the physical benefits of an Islamic prayer, because it's almost like, I mean, I don't like comparing it to yoga, but it has those similar effects. Obviously, when you're doing different stretches, you're doing a much deeper dive into your muscles and what you're trying to do. But nonetheless, what I'm trying to say is that it just seems like the Islamic lifestyle has a lot of conducive realities to success in combat sports. And it's no wonder why some of the toughest guys in the world of mixed martial arts and boxing come from that place. So, more on Devin Haney and LomaChenko. Was it a draw? Was it a fight that LomaChenko won? Or was it a fight that Devin Haney really won? Now about Katie Taylor tonight. Can you say the same thing? Or is it also a variation of subjective opinions? Well, here's a reality of this, including all the fights that you had in the UFC tonight that went to a decision. Some of those were clear. Some of those were not as clear. And some of those you can look at it as a draw, and some of those you can look at it from just one guy or maybe two guys. But the one thing you have to understand about combat sports is that it is a reality that is based on simplicity and not high level complex. But at the same time, it's also the aspect of doing the small things that makes you better every day. That's the reality of combat sports. And also, once again, I've said this numerous times in this particular episode already, The most toughest guys in the world don't come from the most interesting places. Because the more that you come from an interesting place like LA, Miami, New York, the more distractions that you'll have. By the way, this is one of the things that Jake Paul cited of why he left LA and went to Puerto Rico, or I think he lives in Puerto Rico more often now, but nonetheless, he said that in LA, it was just nothing more than a distraction for him. There was just too many distractions. He just couldn't get away from it. So because of that, Jake Paul had to make a conscious decision of getting himself out of that city and into a remote place like Puerto Rico to where he can just basically, how do I say this, concentrate on his craft. Not only concentrate on his craft, but also be in a position to where he doesn't have to deal with anything or anyone telling him, you have to get into this, you have to get into that, you have to do these wild videos that depict you as this way, or you have to do this for views, you have to do this for clout. No, none of that. He left and went to a place to where he can concentrate. Right now, here's the thing: Puerto Rico. I mean, it's not LA, but man, it's also paradise. You can't say that it's not paradise, but at the same time, it's a place of boxing. It's a place that's enriched in its history of boxing, and he decided to go there to harness his craft in that particular environment in which he couldn't do in LA. Now, with these Dagestani fighters, guess what? They don't have to deal with any of those distractions the way that these other fighters do. So that is something to think about. That is something to think about in the meantime. And one of the things that I think a lot of people really take for granted is the fact that, once again, sometimes simplicity is just all that it takes in order for you to win and succeed. Okay, hold on just a second. Is the fact that, once again, sometimes simplicity is just... I'll be right back. All right, so we're back at it. So, yeah, before I left, I was talking about why the Russian Muslim fighters are some of the most dominant guys in the sport right now. And again, we can cite different reasons for that, and I've cited them all, right? Religious devotion, which gives you nothing but discipline and structure and order through your scheduled day. Uh, Being able to understand the repetitions of what you have to do as a fighter, I think is very conducive with that. The environment as well. They live in the mountains, so there's aspects of high altitude that increases their lung capacity and things of that nature. This is an ever-growing reality that you have to understand. This is why a lot of people go out and train in Big Bear Mountain in California, right? For the same reason why a lot of people train down in Mexico City, high elevation. Those are one of the things that you get. But more so, I think just having that overall structure. And here's the thing that I notice about Devin Haney tonight, because I'm going to talk more about this particular fight with Devin Haney and LomaChenko. I think tonight both guys deserved the win. Okay. Now, does that mean that Lomachenko deserves to be the undisputed champion? No. Because then I guess you kind of understand where I'm leaning with this. I guess I'm saying that Devin Haney deserved to win, but at the same time, Lomachenko didn't deserve to lose because he showed the old Lomachenko that we understood him to be when we crowned him as the pound for pound #1 guy in the world. But at the same time, Devin Haney, we've seen him, quite frankly, dominate a lot of the guys that he's fought all the way to the top. Well, now there's a few times where we have seen Devin Haney struggle and deal with adversity, deal with getting rocked. Tonight, those were one of those nights where you can absolutely say that that was a reality for Devin Haney being able to show his toughness. So that's something that we have to take into consideration. The fact that not only can Devin Haney fight slick, not only can he fight defensive and offensive, but at the same time, Devin Haney can fight as a real tough guy, which proves that he's going to be very hard to beat. Now, he mentions in the post-fight, hey, you know what? Lomachenko deserves to be the undisputed, I'm sorry, not undisputed. He deserves to be a Hall of Famer, right? A future Hall of Famer. Obviously, he doesn't believe he deserves to be undisputed. Sorry for the error there, because he proved to him why he doesn't deserve to be, and he came out with the win, regardless of anyone's subjective opinion. But nonetheless, Lomachenko showed that at 35 years old, he was able to hang in there. And by the way, at this weight class, when you're at that age, you're already on the decline, which again shows the level of intensity that Lomachenko was able to pick up, and the level of tenacity and the level of technical skills and the footwork that he still had going on. You can't deny this from Lomachenko. At the same time, you can't deny Devin Haney as the present and the future of boxing in this current moment. Now, what is next for everybody, right? Because that's the next step, is talking about the next upcoming fights. Well, Devin Haney can do a lot of different things, right? Well, the name that I was about to mention, both of these guys can fight them. Ryan Garcia, he can fight any of these guys. Obviously, there's Tank Davis. I've cited plenty times in this particular episode that we should see these two guys fight, and they're a big key, marquee matchup that you can make at the moment. There's also Shakur Stevenson in the wings, even though he just really stepped up to 135 in his current time right now, right? So he's basically a new 135er in the scene. Who else? Lopez is in there. Lopez could fight any of these guys. And again, Lopez may just very well be a good opponent for anybody, any one of these guys. On any given day, he could beat these guys and get beat himself. And then, of course, there's Cambosos that's somewhere in the wings. He can always go in there and have a good fight with Lomachenko, and they'd make great money off of that. So those are the next fights that you have going on with these guys, right? Now, going back to the subject that I was talking about with Russian Muslims dominating the space right now, right? One of the problems that these guys have is that they have some serious issues getting people to fight them. And the reason being is because, once again, this is something that I haven't mentioned yet, right? But I think is really important to mention. A lot of people think that certain fighters are boring in the world of fighting, right? And that's okay. But with boring comes a certain peace of mind of just being able to concentrate on training. And guess what? The way that Conor McGregor is heavily popular right now, the way that he has engaged himself in multiple business ventures and multiple sponsorships and endorsement deals, it's going to be very difficult for somebody like him to hone down his craft and just stick to it, because everybody wants a piece of you when you're loud, when you're out there, when you have a brash personality. Everybody wants to be a part of it. So when everybody wants to be a part of you, okay, you're constantly giving away yourself to other people, constantly having to take photo ops, constantly having to appear in different TV programs, different podcasts. You constantly have to abide by the rules of social engagement, meaning that if you're going to be this popular, you're going to have to go out and take the time to sign all these different autographs that you normally would not really care to do in your normal off time, right? But at the same time, at some point, you have to deal with this because Khabib once told Islam, or I'm sorry, one of the AKA guys said to Khabib one time, because it was like at the height of his fame where it was starting to grow after the Barbosa fight, or the Michael Johnson fight rather. They said, "Hey, listen, you don't like all this attention, you don't like all this going on, okay, then you go loose. Then nobody gonna care, nobody gonna wanna talk to you, nobody gonna wanna do this or that. So if you don't want, you want loose, okay, go. You don't want attention, go loose." So basically, at some point in the rise to the top, I think that the Dagestanis have this great understanding of privacy, because if you notice, a lot of these guys, you'll never see any photos of their families or their kids or their loved ones or this and that, and primarily for the better, because then what are you going to say? What are you going to talk about? Who are you going to target that's going to get in their heads? And I think for security measures, this is probably even better, because guess what? If you're a famous celebrity like Khabib or Conor or any of these high-level actors or athletes, guess what? Your family can be a potential target for kidnappers. And you ask Vitor Belfort, this is something that he's experienced in the late 90s and early 2000s down in Brazil, which ultimately prompted his move to want to come to the United States and get away from that. So make of that as you will. That's the reality of stardom. Now, with the Dagestanis, okay, they are doing it right, because yes, in the beginning, nobody cares about you because you're not a talkative person. And by the way, if you're in Khabib's team, there's a certain controlling aspect that you have to understand that goes into that team, right? Meaning that they cut a lot of individuality out of you, for better or worse. And again, I'm not here to tell you whether it's good or whether it's bad. I'm presenting to you the news the way that it is. Although you kind of get an idea of where I would lean towards in these things, but still, I'm giving you the most objective point of view that I could give you. So Khabib's team, very military in the way that they approach. Everybody has to have the same haircut. Everybody has to cut their beard a certain way. You can't cut it too short or too long or too bald in one spot or this and that. It all has to be even, okay? All within the Islamic etiquette context. And then in between the training sessions, you have to join them in prayer. You have to join them in what you would call dhikr after prayer, which is calling Allah's name 33 times, whether it's saying Allahu Akbar or Subhanallah or Alhamdulillah, right? These are all the things that you have to do as a Muslim fighter within Khabib's camp, okay? So they do it right. They focus you down in the early parts of your career where you do nothing but just train all day. And not only are you training all day, you're praying all day, and you're stuck in that same regiment, okay? Now, that's good as a fighter, but as an entertainer, because you got to remember, prize fighting is about entertaining. I'm sorry to say, but in the world of YouTube, in the world of clout, in the world of internet celebrities, that's not going to cut it. So you're not going to be as famous. However, being that if you come from their camp, you will get a little bit of clout. And then on top of that, they come from countries where people really support their fighting careers. So their followers are going to be within an automatic at least 200 or 100 to 200K followers in the beginning. And then you can just grow off of that. But nonetheless, in the beginning, nobody really cares if you're not loud, brash, or interesting, right? That's the reality of the whole thing. So that's good. You don't have to deal with any of that. But later on in your career, like what I said, like what Khabib was told, hey, You know, if you don't like attention, then you go lose. You don't like all this, then stop winning. Okay, but the truth is that once you start winning, that's when all the problems occur. That's when all the burnout happens. Remember GSP, he mentions how there was a certain burnout that he felt after defending his title multiple times. Could it be that Khabib decided to end his career at a certain particular time for the purpose of the fact that he felt that, you know what, at some point, I have to burn out from this particular lifestyle and I have to escape from it because it's not going to be conducive to my mental health and my physical health as well. Because let's be honest, combat sports is a very difficult sport to maintain. Okay, so to maintain that level of dominance, there's a certain level of training that you have to do that gives you a certain diminishing return. Now, if you want a longer career, okay, that's possible. But in between that long career, you're going to have to take a few losses, learn from them, okay, because you didn't train as hard in your last fight. But the fact that you didn't train as hard as you did in your last fight, sometimes that can be the best recovery for your body to give you a longer career even after those losses. But with the Dagestani fighters, that's not what they're trying to do. They're not trying to get a few losses or here and there and then come back and then not have a hard training camp, and then the next training camp you're going to have a hard camp, and then you're going to come back and train that way, and in the next camp you're not going to train as hard, so then you're going to lose. Yeah, that type of trajectory, you can maintain a long career. But to the Dagestanis, what they want to do is they want to do the Joe Calzaghe, the Floyd Mayweather, the Khabib Nurmagomedov style, which is retire undefeated and then let the next generation come up and fight for the scraps of that belt that's left. That's what they like to do. That's what the Dagestanis like to do. Now, to maintain that kind of dominance, you're going to have to train and focus on your training camps in each and every fight, meaning that you're present within those camps. You're 100% honed in to whatever it is that you're doing. But a lot of that can sustain a lot of injuries. That's the diminishing side of it. The returning side of training in that same capacity that the Dagestanis do is that you're going to get really good very fast. But as fast as you get good, also the faster that you burn out, which is probably the reason why you're going to see a lot of Dagestanis retire very early within their career. And why not? Here's the thing. I always talk about the two different sides of how people look at fighting, right? They look at it from the perspective of the fans, but then we also look at it from the perspective of the fighters and within the people in the camp. And what do I mean by that? Well, if you're a fight fan, you want to see these guys compete until they can't compete anymore. Okay, and by the way, interesting enough, Conor McGregor mentioned to Ariel Helwani in a Matchroom content YouTube video. Out of all places, you have a Conor McGregor and Ariel Helwani interview in a Matchroom YouTube website. Conor mentions that when he said that he wants to fight forever, what he means is that he wants to calibrate his competition as he gets older. And then he mentioned something to the effect, well, if my son is going to have a fight, then I'm going to fight his father in the same card in the co-main event or something like that. And I was like, okay, I know exactly what type of career trajectory that Conor McGregor is talking about, right? And that's not the kind of career trajectory that the Dagestanis like to do. And what do I mean by that? Well, as you guys know, obviously Conor McGregor recently had his Netflix video out, right? And you've seen in the Chad Mendes fight, he was hurt going into that fight. I think you've seen that even in his first documentary back in 2016. In the Khabib fight, he went in there injured. This is something a lot of Dagestani fighters would not do. They don't go into war or into a combat, and they certainly don't go into a cage fight unprepared and injured. Whereas with Conor McGregor, he doesn't mind. Okay, I'll take this fight. Oh, maybe I'll lose. No big deal. I can always come back because I'm going to have a longer career anyway. With the Dagestanis, it's none of that. It's either with this fight, we train hard or we don't fight or train at all. And when they are in the camps, they train so hard to the point where, look, there's a diminishing return in how it's going to break your body down. And you can't do that forever, which is why Khabib retired at the rightful age of, let's say, 31 or 32 before he could turn in his mid 30s to where it can really start hurting, and the recovery is going to get a lot slower. It's going to be a lot harder, this and that. So again, you got to understand the mentality of the Dagestanis and the Chechens and why they want to fight this way, why they want to go the Mayweather Joe Calzaghe route, which is now called the Khabib Nurmagomedov route. But nonetheless, the same thing, right? Well, you look at Floyd. Why did Floyd retire the way that he did multiple times within his career? Well, for the simple fact that he knows that in order for him to fight these fights, he has to train a certain way, which is going to break his body down. And then he has to fight these certain fighters at a certain time where their bodies are broken down. And if you notice with the matchmaking and the cherry picking that Floyd did over the years, he had it in a methodical time frame. Like, for example, he didn't go out and fight Manny Pacquiao in 2012 when we really wanted it. He waited 3 years later after Manny got knocked out by Marquez, and he saw the vulnerabilities in him and decided, you know what, I'm going to take cherry pickings on this one. Right? So there's a strategy in the way that these different guys go about their careers. Now with Devin Haney, I wonder what type of strategy Devin Haney is going to have moving forward. Because let's face it, Devin Haney takes a lot of shots in his career, and he's only 23 years old. And you got to think this guy has been a pro since he was 16. So you got to think, is there a burnout stage for him in the same similar fashion that Mike Tyson did back in the day? But who knows? Who knows, man? You know, who knows what will happen with that, and who knows what's going to happen with the career of Devin Haney down the road. But I can only speculate right now that, look, you can't be taking these shots like that forever. You can't be out there taking these types of fights, at least not on a constant basis. Now, obviously, Devin Haney is probably not going to fight for a long time. Maybe he'll fight again this year. Maybe he won't. But if he doesn't, it's probably a smart choice. And let me tell you why. Because once again, like I said, we look at the fight game with two different perspectives, right? I'm sorry, but I think I forgot to hammer down this point earlier. The point that I was trying to make is that we look at fighting between fans' perspective and the people that are within the camp's perspective. If you're within the camp, you're going to tell a lot of these fighters to not take the dangerous fights. Because why? You care for them. But if you're in the camp of the fans, you want these guys to take the most dangerous fights because, quite frankly, as human beings, you know what we love to do? We love to build blocks, stack them really high. If you remember as a kid playing Legos, and what do you do after you have those Legos stacked very high? We have this destructive nature in us that wants to see it all crumble down. Okay, and once again, we have that in us. This is why fans want to see new champions every time. What happens when Kamaru Usman dominated the hell out of Tyron Woodley? We're like, oh man, Woodley is done. You know, he got dominated, and now Usman is the man. Knockout after knockout, win after win from Usman, and the next thing you know, Leon Edwards comes in and head kicks him, and guess what? Now we love it. Now we love Leon Edwards, and the same thing's going to happen to Leon Edwards. He's going to either fight somebody like Khamzat, somebody like Colby, or somebody that's within that skill level, and then you got to think to yourself, man, you know what? We love it. We love seeing it. We love seeing the fact that he got knocked out. But guess what? If you're in Leon Edwards' camp, you're not going to like that very much. You're not going to appreciate it very much. Are you? You know, imagine if you're Fabian Edwards, his brother, who's in his corner. Imagine if you're that guy that was yelling in his corner, come on, Leon. You don't let him bully your son. Don't let him bully your son. Man, Usman really did that accent really good, didn't he? That was really awesome, the way that he was able to emulate that guy's accent down to the T. But nonetheless, you're not any of those guys. If you're not any of those guys, you're not going to care, But if you are those guys, you're going to want them to take the best fights possible, because otherwise you would not be out there for their best interest. And again, let's go back to Eddie Hearn, right? This is the interesting thing about Eddie Hearn. A lot of boxing people look at Eddie Hearn as a guy that doesn't care about his fighters' well-being. Well, is it that, or is it that he just operates in the sphere of that I'm a fight promoter and I'm going to put on the best fights and let the chips fall as it may? Because guess what? You've seen all the prospects that he's tried to recruit and tried to promote tonight in the Irish card with Katie Taylor and the Chantel Cameron undercard. A lot of those guys got banged up. A lot of the Irish guys that he tried to move up or try to promote. But here's the thing: don't you want these guys to be in tough competitions, or do you just want to build them up? Just like what I mentioned with the blocks and the Legos that you played with as a kid, only to see them come crumbling down. Welcome to the theater of the unknown. Enjoy the fights.